Welcome to episode 53 of the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a PhD candidate in molecular science and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Francisco Pergola, co-founder and CEO of Cheddies. Cheddies are a high-protein, low-sugar cracker made with no artificial ingredients or preservatives that are light, crispy, cheesy, made with real cheddar cheese, and of course, delicious. On this week's episode, Francisco and I talked about the story of Cheddies and how his brother, Tomas, and him founded it and where it's going. But we more specifically talked about how Cheddies is moving into the regenerative dairy space by using the first certified regenerative organic cheddar in the United States for their crackers. I've mildly been aware of what regenerative farming is, but Francisco really broke it down for me to understand how this is where farming should be moving forward in the future and how Cheddies is actually involving this within their product. I got to know Francisco as he told me some funny stories of the crazy things that have happened along the way. So even if you're not an entrepreneur, this episode is a really good reminder that just one of the greatest assets that you can have is being kind. I can't wait to share this conversation with you. So enough with that introduction. Let's get on with the show. Welcome to episode 53 of the FoodGrads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a PhD candidate in molecular science and career partner with FoodGrads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Francisco Pergola, co-founder and CEO of Cheddies. Cheddies are a high-protein, low-sugar cracker made with no artificial ingredients or preservatives that are light, crispy, cheesy, made with real cheddar cheese, and of course, delicious. On this week's episode, Francisco and I talked about the story of Cheddies and how his brother, Tomas, and him founded it and where it's going. But we more specifically talked about how Cheddies is moving into the regenerative dairy space by using the first certified regenerative organic cheddar in the United States for their crackers. I've mildly been aware of what regenerative farming is, but Francisco really broke it down for me to understand how this is where farming should be moving forward in the future and how Cheddies is actually involving this within their product. I got to know Francisco as he told me some funny stories of the crazy things that have happened along the way. So even if you're not an entrepreneur, this episode is a really good reminder that just one of the greatest assets that you can have is being kind. I can't wait to share this conversation with you. So enough with that introduction. Let's get on with the show. So, thank you so much, Francisco, for coming on the show. And we're going to learn about a topic that I do not know much about, but we're also going to hear about what you and your brother and what you have been doing with an amazing product, Cheddies. And thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here this morning and super excited to be sharing this story for this is a new beginning for us, a new chapter. And so what better way to share about it than on a podcast? Thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing the power of LinkedIn in terms of just things that it chooses to start just spreading throughout networks. But when I saw what you're doing, I was like, this is the type of stories and I got to get to know more about. So yeah, LinkedIn was pretty amazing.
And it felt like such a perfect encounter just because that was our first reveal of the brand shifting into the regenerative space. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but I did go straight from college into this journey. And so it just felt like a kind of an exciting connect.
Mhm. Well, one of the things that really stood out, even just with the post that you did, was just showing, you could just see how happy that you look in that photo. And just seeing like actual happy photos in a manufacturing facility is nice to see, because I find like, I don't know if you found this with manufacturing photos, like stock photos online, and it's like these people and they're like investigating like vegetables in a way that I'm like, no one ever looks at a vegetable this way.
Oh man, it's these past couple of years have totally just shifted my mentality of what the manufacturing space really means. And it's such an amazing thing to see all these hardworking people really just dedicating every minute of their time in there to other people. And it's super cool.
For sure. And we have to start getting into how you got into this space with, of course, Cheddies. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. So I went to Kansas State. I'm a graduate from K-State. And for those of you that don't know, it's in Manhattan, Kansas. And you drive 10 minutes in any direction and you're either in a wheat field or a cornfield or soybean, you name it. And that in and of itself was a really cool experience. I loved my time there. But I studied architecture and did a 5-year master's, which kind of accelerated my studies. And in my last year there, I just became enamored with just food. I've always been a foodie and wanted to start finding ways of combining design with food and what my next steps might look like after graduating. And while I was finishing my thesis, I thought I would take a chance and take a venture into the CPG space, consumer packaged goods. And over my summer, I thought it would be really fun to create a healthy brand catered to patients with specific dietary needs. So higher protein, lower carbs, and a plethora of other requirements that I thought, hey, it'd be fun to see if I can whip something up in the kitchen and start selling on the door to actually dialysis clinics in San Antonio. So it's patients with kidney failure, diabetes. So it's a really kind of weird beginning, but we can continue to shift into other aspects.
That's amazing in terms of just even taking the leap, because as someone who's in a graduate program, like I know what the feeling is to even think about outside of doing anything else and taking that leap, not knowing if this is going to be a space that I can continue. That's really commendable.
Yeah, I kind of tiptoe around it all because it gets a little bit complicated how I
Mhm.
actually ended up doing Cheddies. So specifically, I was looking to redesign the hospital waiting room experience. Both my parents are doctors. And so I grew up hearing about all these issues and just red tape that patients would have while waiting in the hospitals. And so while I was doing my thesis, I was doing some research over the summer, just sitting in different waiting rooms. And that's where I realized there was like this huge need for healthier snacks in the community. And that's really where this evolved from, was meeting those needs.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense. And
Yeah.
I have to jump back, take a little step back, because although
Yeah.
we've talked about you, we actually haven't talked about what Cheddies actually are. And I just want to
Yeah.
core talk about that now. I know it's a shifting thing, so maybe you can dive into how that shift is happening. But so tell me a little bit more about the product.
Yeah, so Cheddies are, first of all, just an amazingly delicious cheese cracker. And we're super proud to announce that we're actually the first cheese cracker in the space in the whole US to be using regeneratively sourced cheddar cheese from a farm that we're now working with off the coast of California, here on Northern California. So just South of Oregon. And yeah, we have just super simple ingredients and really pride ourselves on trying to just source the absolute best quality ingredients for our product.
Okay. So would Cheddies would be, because I know cracker can be a very like a large basis. Is it a fully cheddar or cheese product, or is it like a flour based, or is it like a combination?
So it's a combination, another great talking point. So we are the leading product on the market for the amount of cheese we actually do use in our product. So we use almost 10x what anyone else does for their formulation. Of course, just the big name out there, Cheez-It. We like to think of ourselves as Cheez-Its on steroids. So we're better for you. We're better for the environment. We're just really trying to make a difference in how, consumers snack, and just shifting mentality about how we can actually have an impact on the way we grow our food.
Okay, so let's do it. Let's dive into that topic of regenerative farming. And let's start with maybe talking about why you decided to make that leap to going towards it. We can talk about what regenerative farming is, and let's take it from there.
Absolutely. We have been on the market for almost 4 years now. And just throughout our journey, it was interesting to always note how people were always so interested about just like unique selling aspects and what makes us different and why is our cheese so special. And that was something that we would always come back to and just ask ourselves, what does make our cheese so special? We talk about it so much and we pride ourselves on being the cheese cracker that uses the most cheese, and felt like there was something missing there. And I've always just been a green thumb and kind of a hippie at heart. Actually, before I went into architecture, I almost went into agriculture, two really different things, but thought this was like a really amazing opportunity for us to take that leap and figure out if we could have an impact in the dairy space, something that, as you know, has been just ever changing and evolving. And
Yes.
so we would ask ourselves, what is the dairy space going to look like 10 years from now? And we're putting our money on consumers caring about its ecologic impact and uh, animal welfare impact, and making sure that it's being sourced from a responsible dairy farm that cares not only for its animals, but the land as well. And so these are just the very early stages of regenerative dairy, but it was seemingly just a perfect pairing for us.
Mhm. That's really nice. And it's interesting as well to see more expansion in terms of the idea of there's been a lot of shifts to things like vegan products and that and plant-based, which rightfully so I get, but it's also nice to
Mhm.
hear about there are going to be individuals who want to still consume dairy, but they want to do it in a very mindful manner. Like I know for one, I'm a person who would like to be like that. I don't see myself switching to
Yeah.
vegan. So like working in a better way with if we are going to eat these animal-based products. Regenerative farming, now that I like talk about it, I'm thinking, okay, so we have regenerative farming, but we're talking about animals here. Like, where is that intercept in terms of where Cheddies is
Yeah.
taking it?
No, and I think this is such a really interesting topic, just because part of what we want to do at Cheddies is shed light on like the transparency of where our food is coming from. Like that's something that I'm finding more and more that today's consumer doesn't know much about. So like we talk about vegan and vegetarian and dairy, but like at its core, people don't really know how those things actually intersect and the impact that it has on its land. And if you were to talk to a farmer, I'm sure they would tell you that they all impact each other in a lot of different ways. And I actually had the pleasure of spending a week with their supplier, Alexander Family Farms. And man, what an experience. I was so humbled. They took me in for a week, and I actually specifically asked them to put me to work. I wanted to experience what it was that they did and feel the passion that they had for seeing a change, not only on their land, but for their animals. And that has a direct correlation on the quality of the dairy that they're producing there. We talk about how you farm your dairy can have a tremendous impact on your land. And it's so true. I'd much rather see cows and animals out on pasture being rotated meticulously. And there's such a deep care for the way those animals are treated. And it makes all the difference, I think.
For sure. In every respect, in terms of if you're thinking of it from if you think of it from a product's perspective, like being better quality, but not even just that. More importantly, knowing that the animals are treated well, like it's just ethically right. I don't know. Like it's just a better way to be at one with the land, be at one with just being a better person, I think. So,
Oh, when I first drove up to the farm, it was like this surreal moment because I've traditionally just only interacted with traditional dairies. And so when I drove up to the farm, I just saw this whole herd of cows just grazing out on the pasture. And there was this kind of mist floating out on the land and the sunset in the background. And I stopped and I took it all in. And before you knew it, like all the cows were just surrounding the car and they were just so docile and friendly. And you could just tell they were so happy. Like it was just this weird experience. Like the very moment I drove up on the farm, I was like, this just has to be something that we see more of and consumers are aware of. I think dairy has just like a really negative just stigma behind it. And I seeing that there is an alternative to responsible dairy farming is really just put a smile on my face.
that's awesome because I know that growing up, I've lived in an area where it's like a suburban area, but like literally the
Mhm.
road beside me is just like farming town. And as years go on, the farming sadly is starting to be taken
Yeah.
away and redeveloped. And
Mhm.
I know that it's just a little sad because even me, who's so surrounded with the food production industry and all that, like even I feel like I'm not connected enough to knowing where my food comes from, even as much as I wish that I was. And it's about having more conversations and like stuff like this just to hear a little bit more about it because it can be so easy to just separate yourself from the farming when you look at a
Mhm.
product on the supermarket. It really is easy unless you go out and actively do it yourself.
Absolutely. And it's so easy to just start talking about things that you really haven't had a direct experience with. And so that's our goal, is to just reel it all back in for consumers and just share more about where their food is actually coming from. Something that, with your bigger brands, you really do lose because they're so value driven that their core focus really is just how do we get more product into a box for less? And I think that has its place in the grocery store. But for us, something that we were passionate about was just, how do we snack more responsibly? Like, snacking definitely has its place in a lifestyle, but what are the most appropriate times to be snacking? How can our snacking have an impact on the way we grow our food? And at least with that mentality, I have found myself maybe not just totally indulging every time I snack, but just being more select about the food that I eat. And the quality of my actual meals has increased because I'm treating my snacking experience as more of a luxury and more of a experience than I had in the past. And I think I'd love to see that more in the snacking space, of people choosing their snacks based on what it is that they're providing for their suppliers and the land that the food is coming from. And I think that's something moving forward we really want to strive for.
I think that's a great thing to strive for. And it's a really interesting way of looking about things. And I know that prior to hitting the record button, we had a little discussion about working or the food production space, because I know that once I started, like when I got my first quality control co-op position, like it really changed my whole perspective of food. And ever since that day, I see it as, okay, there's the line operator who did this, and then you have the person who puts it in and it's just, I put lots of faces to it. And when I was in the facility, I could look at the shelf, look at the production data and go, okay, so it was this person on this day.
Exactly.
So for someone who is like you, who coming out of your degree, like how has your views of the manufacturing side changed?
Oh man, I mean, you really nailed it. I think
Okay.
there's so much love that goes into just every single aspect of what happens out there. And it's such a collective group effort. And one thing I've really learned to appreciate, which I don't know how other brands go about their business, but one thing I really try to do when I go out there is just create a friendship with everyone. It doesn't matter if it's the person operating the line or the person just making sure that the salt is flowing correctly, or that you name it, right? Everyone touches the product at some point. And I love connecting with everyone who's involved with our product, because it is so important. Like, everyone have a huge impact. It only takes just a very minute detail to throw a large operation off. And so I've really come to value those friendships in and out the manufacturing facility.
Mhm. That's amazing. And I say this like on every episode of the podcast, but again, it always amazes me like anything actually gets created on a manufacturing line, with just like the amount of people that are involved. And even in a small space, if you're an entrepreneur and you're working for a startup and you do your first production run, but there's so many people that are involved in just like bringing it out. You have where you sourced your dairy from, where you have the people that were putting it in the bags. Like it really floors me every single time.
Yeah, every time. And it's so much preparation. It's something that, at least on the consumer end of things, like you said, you grab your box of whatever it is off the shelf and you don't give a lot of thought of what actually went into getting a material into the box. And there is just so much that happens behind the scenes. There's so many people that come together to try to make something so seemingly simple happen. And when there's price increase on the shelf, it's harder for people to understand why those price increases happen. But in my opinion, it's a miracle that they only increase so marginally, because everybody is affected. People growing the food, to transporting the food, to everything. So
I forget that myself
it's a
too.
miracle. Yeah.
I really do. Even I am like, why is like this going up in price? And it's just again, going back to the farming, like you can be so far removed from understanding that, well, it is more expensive because there was maybe a drought that particular year and 20% of the farmers couldn't get the grains that they normally did. It's
Exactly.
crazy the
Exactly.
and it's amazing
Yeah.
like
And
the margins on the stuff, into like how sorry, I cut you off.
and that's actually that's an amazing talking point, just because part of what regenerative agriculture aims to provide farmers with is greater independence from a lot of those variables. I know moving forward, water shortages, unfortunately, are going to be something that are very real. And I know California and a lot of our other states are already seeing some of these water issues, and with the logistical issues we've been having, farmers have been having difficulties getting fertilizers and just pesticides and even seeds or grain. And so part of what regenerative agriculture aims to do is, how do we minimize external inputs? How do we maximize yield and production without the dependence of somebody else coming onto my land to facilitate with how efficient we operate things here? The aim of regenerative agriculture is, let's create our own fertilizer. We have animals on our land. Let's compost. Let's distribute compost back onto our land. It disturbs the microorganisms living in the soil that are so crucial to growing our food. And let's put cover crops so that when it does rain, we are capturing as much of that water back into our soil. And the difficult part about regenerative agriculture is it takes a little bit of time before you start to reap the benefits of what it can do for your land and for your crops. But long term, I think it's far superior solution to trucking in food for your animals and fertilizers and pesticides to grow your food. It's a much more sustainable option for our farmers.
See, I'm learning, because I didn't even consider about like those other aspects of what regenerative farming is, because I've only been thinking it from the perspective of just like making good soil and that type of stuff. But there's so many, it's a very holistic way of going about, which seems like what farming should be. Like, I feel like this is what farming was, and it just lost trajectory.
Precisely. Well, I think I don't blame the trajectory it's taken. We, as humans, I think, have just developed extremely quickly with technologies and access to fertilizers and equipment. And that's all fantastic, but it happened so quickly that I think we veered away from something that had been working for a very long time. And it's actually a miracle we've come back to it so quickly. And I'm excited to see more and more farmers develop these practices again.
Yeah, for sure. Me too. And I also was curious about, we're talking about the coming back in that. And I know that for many entrepreneurs, I don't know if that's the right term to use for you. I'm sorry. But, I was more so
Definitely
thinking about, it's a tough thing what you're doing. I was watching your videos on your YouTube channel in terms of your blog, and just seeing about just the day to day and the true rawness about going about it. And it seems really tough. And what has kept you going and just staying in this space? Because it's very easy to just say I'm done, because it's a lot of moving parts.
So many moving parts. And I think the huge advantage we had early on was, so we made a decision, both Tomas and I, after graduating, that we would venture out and take a chance on a different career path early on, knowing that we could always come back to our studies and to our peers. And I think in a lot of ways, that naiveness of just taking that risk was a huge blessing, just because we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. And I think the older you get and the more experiences you have with those around you, you realize just how difficult it is to get anything done. We had no idea what we were walking into, and the challenges just continue to come up every day and every year. They evolve, and I'd like to think that they get easier to manage. But yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, I've always encouraged everyone from an early age, if you are wanting to venture out and do something new, just learn at a young age, fail hard and quick, get it out of the way. And you're still going to have those same experiences as you would taking a more traditional corporate route. It's just, it's different in the way they happen.
So you have to have some like good stories. There's probably like hundreds of good stories that you've had. Is there anything that like stands out in particular for you?
We could be here until tomorrow, honestly. But
that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that was fun. Let's see. I will just say this much. Tomas and I have been grinding. Like we'll drive the distance. We'll go through a hurricane. We will do whatever it means to at least say we didn't not try. So one thing that we did was our first ever purchase order was through Hy-Vee. And we had just finished the Dairy Farmers of America Accelerator there in Kansas City. And the buyer for Hy-Vee, we had been knocking on his doorstep for a while. And he had seen something in the news about our pitch. And funny enough, his boss, the buyer's boss, was like, "Hey, I brought these Cheddies to my house and my wife is just so in love with these things. Where can she buy them?" And the buyer had to tell him that, "Hey, like these guys have been knocking on my doorstep for a while and let me give them a shot." Where they're not actually carried by Heidi. So that was a really funny story that he shared with us. And shortly after that, he was like, "Hey, we have a really cool opportunity coming up here in Des Moines, Iowa. It's all the buyers from all our stores will be here at a sort of a yearly conference. And we invite select suppliers to come out and share their product with our managers, store managers, etc. Could be a really great way to get exposure for your brand. Would you guys want to come up, set up a booth, etc.?" And of course we said yes, but that we always say yes before really thinking about the things I need to get done in order to fulfill the yeses. But we actually ended up having to load up our truck with a pallet of Cheddies and a booth and the whole thing and drove up to Des Moines. It was like a 16, 17-hour drive. It was like the next day we needed to go up. And we did it in one shot. And at one point it was like, we were out in the middle of nowhere, like some cornfields. And this is horrible to actually admit, but we were both like catching ourselves falling asleep. Of course, there was no one around. It was the middle of the night. But at one point we were like, we got to pull over. We were so tired. We literally pulled over on the side of the road. It was pitch dark out. We didn't even know where we were and fell asleep almost immediately, just sitting in our chairs. And that next morning we woke up. It was like the surreal, just sunset with some dairy cows actually like right by our car, just like grazing. And it was like the birds chirping and it was like so beautiful. And we are like, this is nuts. And we finished out our trek. It was like another 3 or 4 hours. And we got to the convention set up and put our smiles on and just started handing out Cheddies. We actually landed while we were there a deal with their convenience stores. It was like 300 convenience stores for that Hy-Vee actually has. And it was super worth it. But it was just stuff like that we were always just putting ourselves out there. Stuff like that is just, it's fun, memorable ththings that I don't think we'll ever forget.
Oh, that is an amazing story. As you're staying and I'm just sitting here, I'm imagining the pitch, like it's actually perfect. It's probably like the perfect place to sleep because it's so quiet in the middle of
So
the night
nice.
and so dark and all that. And it's so nice to just hear people really going for something that they believe in because it's so easy to get caught up in like the routines of your own life and trying to,
Yeah.
and of course, there's a lot of important obligations people have, but just to just go for something, it's really inspiring.
Yeah. I know people hear this all the time. There's ups and downs and there's more downs than there are ups. And so when the ups do come around, you don't hesitate for a second, but to just take that opportunity and really celebrate them and explore what it means for the business. And yeah, so like whenever there's something like that happens, we don't even react. We just we load up the car and we go. So yeah,
For
fun
sure.
stories always.
Oh, for sure. And I'm assuming as well, like with these stories that has there been like any lessons maybe, or has there been something that like a reoccurring thing that you've really stood by that you have discovered as you've gone through this journey?
Oh yeah, I would say so. We're a startup, and every penny spent is definitely felt, and we really need to think about all our decisions. We're not a big corporation with super deep pockets. And so in all these years, like our relationships with our suppliers has been huge. And not only our suppliers, but just anyone that just as yourself, like you reached out and are wanting to share our story and support our journey. Like anyone that we cross paths with that has just been openly wanting to help us succeed and share our brand has been so important to our success. I hate calling them favors, but more often than not, people are always being super friendly to help us in any way that they can. And we're all on the same objective here, which is let's make some Cheddies, let's spread the word. And yeah, just a lesson I learned was just really learn to appreciate those interactions with like your flour supplier or your salt supplier or anyone, right? Like the film or even like the trucker who went out of their way to make sure that we got the product we needed on time. Because more often than not, we're always rushing to get things done. Things are super tight timelines. So yeah, over the years, just those relationships are super key, and just being really great and impeccable about communication goes a long way.
Mhm. I know this might be an odd question, but it's always something that as a student when I was like again, I know it's a student, but not
Yeah.
different in your
Yeah.
case, but it's been something I've always struggled with in terms of not coming off you want something from like how do you build meaningful relationships that are like not taking
Yeah.
I don't even know how to get it. Like I'm not sure how I'm articulating it because it's you don't want to take advantage of someone. You don't want to be there because I'm trying to be because I need something because you're not. But just like how do you make
Yeah.
meaningful relationships? It's tough in terms of or maybe it's not tough. Like I don't know. Maybe I overthink things.
Well, no, I think I totally empathize with what you're saying. And I've found myself many times asking the same question, which is this person feeling like I'm just using them or just I'm taking advantage of like their kindness? But I think just first and foremost, it's just important to always realize that most of these suppliers and are always like working with like larger businesses, and they don't really have an opportunity to create meaningful relationships with entrepreneurs that are grinding for their own small business. And so more often than not, people are always super curious and like conversations are lighthearted and fun. And I think people really like to see their help going a long way and having a big impact on what it is that we're doing. And so I always love to share like product and send them updates on how like things went and just feeling like they're going to be involved with the success of Cheddies. And I have found that people really enjoy feeling like they're a part of our journey as well. It's something that is unique. And I think just a huge advantage of being a small business is being able to share those experiences with everyone involved in what we're doing here.
Okay. That's a really interesting like way to think about it because one of the things you did mention was just like the time. You guys, of course, are very busy grinding and doing all that type of stuff. So it's like, how do you take the time to show like at the end of the day, it sounds like it's just being grateful, really being
Oh,
grateful,
absolutely.
showing that you're grateful for it, even if you might like it's funny how we always think about doing these grand gestures of being thankful and all that, but sometimes it's just really like consistently saying thank you and thank you.
Oh my God. Yeah. I think I say thank you more than anything else. And I apologize. I feel like I'm always apologetic and thankful. You do put people in really tight situations at times with timing of things. And yeah, just being super respectful, I think has just been so important. And also just being transparent, I think goes a super long way because things aren't always okay. And I think it's okay to share with the people helping you that maybe you are in a pinch or you do need help or guidance or opinions and I think it's okay to make yourself open and vulnerable at times. And people want to feel like they can be helpful on your journey. Like early on, it was like, oh, how do we puff up our chests to let people think that everything's under control? We're this big business that knows what we're doing. And I don't know if that's super beneficial all the time. I think just being transparent about how people can help you along your journey can be really important as well. So that's just something I've learned over the years.
That's the stuff I want to hear because we get so like with just things in general, like social media, and not even that, like books and all that. And it's like,
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
confident and do this and don't show.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
like sometimes it's just the principles of what you learn as like a kid, be kind, say
Yeah.
thank you, and all those little things
Yes.
that are also like truer to who you are too. You know, you don't have to
Yeah.
fake being that.
Well, and I maybe we're going down a rabbit hole, but I've just always felt like kindness gets you so much further than like anything else. Really. If you can react to any situation in a kind and respectful way, I feel like people are less likely to react in a negative way, even in a situation where potentially the other person is at fault, which has happened to us, whether or not it's a human error or they forgot or it was an accident. Like rather than reacting and pointing fingers, it's always, I have found to just be like, that's okay. I'm sorry this happens. How can we figure out together how to move forward from this? People are way more appreciative of not needing to be on the defense immediate. Because the minute someone goes on the defense, you've lost them. It's now just a finger pointing battle. And that gets you nowhere. That's complete gridlock. Yeah, I found that early on. It's just better to be level headed about even bad situations.
Well, I don't think it veered away too far because it goes back to the whole idea of the theme of what regenerative farming is. And you could think of it in a way of it's just like being kinder to the land or like being kinder to the farmers and all those types of things. So,
yeah. Well, and regenerative really is so much about community and like treating your neighbors with respect. And regenerative is I think really deeply ingrained with community and helping those around you and trading and bargaining. And at least my time out there on the farm was everyone was helping each other. It wasn't just how do I benefit from the things I'm doing? Yet how can those around me also benefit? And I think if we can strengthen that sense of community within our farmers, it's going to alleviate a lot of tensions we're having, I think, as a country right now with our agricultural processes.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion, but I'm going to take it because I want to take two questions and one's going to put the perspective on you and one's going to take the perspective on Cheddies. So I just wanted to know, because I always think it's good to know in people's journey as well. Like we talk about how you got to where you are today, but what about right now? Is there anything that you are actively working on? Like maybe there's a skill or is there maybe a topic that might be, I think I know the answer for talking about a topic you're learning more about, but is there anything that you're actively working on yourself right now?
You're as a personal skill, like internal skill, trying to hone in on or develop.
Just like maybe something, I guess where I'm trying to get at is just like looking at people and we're always in this constant journey of bettering ourselves in some kind of way. So is there anything, it could be personal, it could just be even going to the gym more. I don't know, but is there anything that you're looking to do right now?
Yeah, I think that these past couple of years have really twisted my perspective on everything with the pandemic and then just difficulties getting ingredients, things getting stuck at the port. And it was I think everyone felt it in a lot of different ways. It was a huge mental strain for everyone. Like being in the house and it was just life just flipped on its head. Where am I going with this? So as of lately, just trying to ask people more about what they've done to combat that. What do they do for fun? As of lately, I like to connect with people, our suppliers, our retailers, and everyone about how the pandemic has affected their life for good or for bad. And I just like to connect on a more personal level nowadays before just jumping right into business. Again, like I go back to just creating these relationships with people that are going to help you on your journey. And just coming out of the pandemic, I've realized that sometimes there's more to business than just the things that need to get done. And people do like to talk about, to your point, things that they've been doing lately, time they've been spending with family. Sometimes I even send pictures or they send me pictures of like their dog or like a cool like trip that they've taken and just creating relationships with people that really are on the same journey that you are. I think we take it for granted because nowadays we communicate with people via email and over the computer and those face-to-face interactions don't happen as much. In person, I think you forget that a lot of the time you interact with someone, it isn't always business. And so, yeah, that's something that I've really been making an effort to do is just asking like, hey, how's your weekend? What have you been up to lately, etc. And I think that's been going a long way.
I love that. See, that was not that's why I like asking that question because it's not the answer I was expecting to get because I was expecting maybe like a more hard skill, but I love that because it's just being, and not only that, like you just enriches your own life just in general, just to be a happier person. There's stuff outside of business and it really just makes you a more whole person. I know I've been so happy since I've started this podcast to just, it's not very often that you actually sit down with someone, you get someone's undivided time for a full hour. Like I'm like so appreciative to you to sit down and just like talk like this because I'll be honest, sometimes I don't even do that with my own family, which arguably is my own fault. But because there's so many distractions and you get so much in the day to day, which is not good, but I like your answer.
No, and I think it's just, I think the day-to-day routine can be monotonous. And so, and even, it doesn't even have to be like, oh, things are always dandy. I find that people also enjoy talking about like some struggles that they've been facing. Because let's face it, we're all in the same boat. And I think there's nothing wrong with just ranting about it sometimes. And that, I feel like just needing to get it off your chest feels good. And I
Yeah,
think those are just fun conversations that I want to have more with people.
for sure. And the other question I had to ask, so maybe it's a two-parter question as well. So what is next for Cheddies and where can we find them?
Yes. So we're just getting started, which I'm super excited about. I say that every year because it does feel like there's always something new just around the corner. But what's next for us? We're full steam ahead on figuring out how to continue educating consumers about what regenerative agriculture means. Like I said, it's such an interesting word in and of itself. It's a tongue twister, and we're betting on people wanting to learn more about how their food is having an impact on their land. So we're always having conversations about how can Cheddies have an impact on shelves and off shelves. And really excited for this year and to see how those changes start to get implemented. And Cheddies, we are rolling out nationwide. We're in all Sprouts, H-E-B, Albertsons, United supermarkets, and then select natural grocers, smaller mom and pop stores across the country. You will soon find us on Amazon and our own website.
Okay. I have to ask because I'm a Canadian. So is there any places Canadians can get your product?
Great question. I guess you guys have a few big box stores up there, don't you? A couple
Yeah, we
large
do.
retailers. Yeah. We've tried now for a little bit trying to get into Canada. It's an interesting territory to step toes in, but we found that the Canadian market is actually big cheese lovers. So
We
we
are, yeah.
definitely want to be in Canada as soon as possible, as soon as we can.
Well, you gotta, as soon as you guys hit Canada, you gotta hit me up and make sure that I can spread the word on that one because I would love to be able to
Absolutely.
share it. But what do you think that we'd be able to get it in Amazon if it gets onto Amazon?
I think actually, yeah, I think Amazon does ship to Canada from the US, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's Amazon. I swear, like it's
Right.
everywhere.
So it's everywhere at this point. Yeah.
I'll have to
It's
do
on
it.
Amazon then.
I'll do a little test for you and I'll let you know how that goes.
I'll have to let us know
For
if it's got
sure.
any interesting stickers on it for international shipping, but
Sounds
I
great.
don't think
Well,
it would be.
now, who knows,
Yeah.
but I'll get back to you on that one.
Okay.
Anyway,
Sounds good.
thank you so much, Francisco, for coming on the show. This was really, honestly, this was a great conversation in terms of just, I start these sit down. I think it's going to go one way, but then I get so much out of these and just hearing like your personal story and just hearing your philosophies. And I can see why Cheddies is becoming like, has taken the way it has when you have like someone who's behind the helm like you, who's surrounded by, of course, supporting people, as we've been talking in this theme. It's great to be able to share something like that. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
No, and thank you so much for hearing our story and spreading our word. And again, just showing support for what we're trying to do here. And I just one last word on my end, we're really excited about this new wave of young entrepreneurs. We're going to need all of them that we can get, just showing support for sustainability and not just agriculture, but in so many different ways. And I think this is definitely the generation to step up and take a leap of faith and just try something new, try having an impact. So thank you for spreading the word.